Thank you, Anne, for the kind invitation. Thank you for having me at this conference. Indeed, I want to talk to you about the future of the geopolitics of technology. Anne has suggested that indeed we're seeing changes in the global system, return of geopolitics, the end of globalization, a broken international trade system, a new Cold War, a battle between techno-authoritarianism and techno-democracies, and that the foundations of the liberal world order are being shaken. And technology stands at the very heart of, at the very epicenter of these multiple earthquakes that we see unfolding and accelerated by the war in Ukraine and the COVID-19 pandemic. The question I want to ask is, how far will it go? And to answer this question, I will address first, what are the drivers of a tech decoupling that we're seeing, where the world is separating between techno-democracies and techno-authoritarian states. What are the drivers of this? What are the shapes of this tech decoupling? And finally, what we can expect for the future. The drivers first, I can see four of them. The first is a search for protection against cyber threats and espionage. The second is a search for protection against economic coercion and supply chain disruptions. The third is a promotion of different political models through technology. And finally, the search for competitiveness. First, regarding the protection of, against cyber threats and espionage, we see that with the development of cloud technology, this issue has become increasingly a focal point for the public, considering the extraterritoriality of the laws of the United States and China when it comes to accessing data from, for example, European customers using US cloud services, or increasingly Chinese cloud services such as Alibaba that is increasingly reaching out to the global market. And the laws of countries such as the US and China allow authorities to access for national security purposes, sometimes in particular in the Chinese case with a very broad notion of national security reasons, to access data that is hosted by such providers. We see that it is creating a drive in Europe to attempt and try and develop alternatives to US and Chinese cloud providers. We see that also with new technology comes new risk, and with the arrival of 5G, we've seen such concerns about cyber threats and espionage coming to the fore again, with new risks coming from new vulnerabilities, potential backdoors, risks of intrusions and cyber attacks with 5G equipment. And this has led to the exclusion, for instance, of Chinese 5G equipment providers in various countries, North America, in Europe, and in Asia. The second point, protection against supply chain disruption and economic coercion. We've seen that there is increasingly what we call a weaponization of interdependency and threats or actual facts of economic coercion. For instance, discrimination against businesses, delays to business authorizations, selective checks and boycotts that have been implemented by China against countries such as Lithuania or Australia. And we've seen that with the pandemic, as well as the war in Ukraine, the concern about internationalized value chains in critical sectors and dependencies on single suppliers, including, for instance, China for IT equipment and raw materials, has driven a willingness by countries to reorganize their supply chains in many different domains, and has led to new sanctions against, for example, Russia in the case of Ukraine. I'll talk again about sanctions in a minute. We see third, the promotion of different political models through technology. And here, that's where we see, especially in international institutions and international bodies, different pushes for, on the one hand, democratic norms for technology, that is to say, developing technology that embed democratic principles within them, such as privacy by design, security by design, interoperability by design, and openness of the internet and digital services. And on the other hand, an illiberal push to increase state control over the internet, as is visible in the case of the Russia-China proposal for a new IP that would create a system of loosely interconnected networks, each with specific rules enforced by some sort of massive VPN, and that would create control points as well as potential capacities to decrypt communications or enforce shutdowns of internet traffic. And we see indeed an increase in the use of internet shutdowns, including by countries that are democracies. The fourth driver for decoupling is competitiveness. Technology is so broad-ranging, has such implications for all economic sectors that countries all want to develop their own national ecosystems. And sometimes that means trying to indeed develop national alternatives to foreign providers in order to gain the economic added value of that. So that decoupling is taking different shapes. I see four main trends. The first is an increase in sanctions and restrictions to trade and transfer of technologies. Then we see indeed new investments in technology, ecosystems, and reindustrialization efforts, especially in post-industrial societies. We see restrictions to foreign investments coming from countries that do not respect the same norms. And we see restrictions to scientific and technological collaborations. When it comes to sanctions, in particular, this has been driven by the US in an effort to thwart China's rise as a tech giant. So it has initially been driven by the US against Chinese tech companies. We've seen exclusion of Chinese companies from US networks and services, as well as measures to restrict the trade of US technology towards China, as well as towards other countries such as Iran and North Korea. And the US for that uses the extraterritoriality of its laws to try and make its partners and allies adopt similar policies with regards to tech transfers towards China. And this trend of an increased number of sanctions and an increased number of sectors that are concerned by these trade restrictions is likely to continue under the Biden administration and probably also after the US midterm election. We see that with the war in Ukraine, similar questions have been raised and sanctions have also been taken that target Russian tech companies, either forbidding the sale of equipment to Russian companies or forbidding the import of technology and equipment from Russia. We've seen that this targets also companies such as Kaspersky, which has a huge market in Europe. Kaspersky, the cybersecurity and antivirus company, has been targeted by US sanctions and also new restrictions in Europe. What these sanctions and restrictions can have as an impact in the long term is that they can lead to a restructuring of value chains and changes in providers that can have a lasting impact. And this may actually lead to reinforcement of this decoupling and perhaps increased rapprochement between Russia and China. Second point, I won't dwell on that. We've seen all around the world an increase in investment in local technological ecosystems and efforts towards reindustrialization and new innovation policies and innovation plans for local ecosystems in US, in Europe, in Asia as well. Won't dwell either on this third point of restrictions to foreign investment, but very briefly, we've seen that countries have increased the number of sectors that are considered critical today to include also innovations in the renewable energy domain, for example, as well as quantum technology, energy storage, 3D printing, obviously AI and cybersecurity. And in those domains, there is a lowering of the threshold of foreign ownership, according to which states decide to screen foreign owners or prevent takeovers from foreign countries. And this has especially been reinforced with China in mind, but it can also sometimes be applied even among allied countries, as sometimes US takeovers of European companies are being, if you like, refused by the states because sectors are considered too strategic. Fourth, and finally, restrictions to science and technology collaboration. We see that democratic countries face a dilemma between a desire to remain open to science and technology collaboration while also being safe from the risks that are related to unfair academic practices and involuntary technology transfers, again, with China in mind. We see, however, different approaches between Europe that is non-discriminatory in its approach, does not target China specifically, whereas the US has developed a special case for China, especially under the Trump administration, to limit the incoming of Chinese researchers and increase the control over their actions. And here again, we see that the war in Ukraine is having an accelerating effect, targeting this time Russia, where scientific collaborations have either been canceled or any new project at least put on hold for an indefinite amount of time. Also, Russia itself has taken measures to limit its collaboration, especially in space, which has consequences for the global scientific community. So looking ahead, after we see all this doom and gloom, I just want to say one positive potential outcome and then another severe one. The positive outcome, perhaps, is that decoupling is coming together hand in hand with the green transition. And we see that the EU has developed a lot of policy programs that are aiming both at digitalizing the EU and the green transition, so that reindustrialization efforts, investments in innovation and digital technology are targeting, in particular, clean technology, clean processes, clean industrial processes, and with the recycling of material, cleaner production, local mining of raw materials, as well as the development of new materials and searches for alternative sources of energy for factories. This perhaps will have a positive impact, at least for the fight against climate change. Also, when we think about the pollution effects of global trade. However, I think there is a longer term trend that is worrying when it comes to international governance and the future of multilateralism, and in particular the post-Second World War international institutions that have been set up that are based on this principle of multilateralism. What we see is that within multilateral institutions today, there are battles going on where indeed non-democratic illiberal countries are teaming up to push. I was talking about the new IP project, but we see also when it comes to cyber norms of behavior on cyberspace, there are competing efforts, some led by Russia to push for greater state control, others led by the civil society as well as democratic states trying to push for a free and open internet and democratic norms online. We see that China is also increasingly using international standards bodies to influence technical norms for technology. And we know that the companies that are pushing for such norms have links to the Chinese Communist Party. And liberal governments are debating how to respond without using the same methods. But so the multilateral order is really being shaken from the inside. And outside of it, we see a fragmentation of global governance with what we call new tech alliances that are taking shape. So that means some groupings of states that already existed, such as the G7 or the Quad that brings together US, India, Australia, and Japan, are also increasingly focusing on technology among themselves within like-minded countries. Russia and China, I was mentioning, also increasingly focusing on technology among themselves. We see at a broader scale, the EU and the US coming together with this Trade and Technology Council that aims at coordinating and achieving transatlantic convergence on a range of tech-related issues. So this is with the aim of global influence, but it's happening among like-minded countries. And we can wonder in the longer term, what will happen if these spheres of influence or these groups indeed solidify among themselves and get increasingly separate rather than solidifying the multilateral order. And we're likely to see through this decoupling, a hardening of sanctions and trade restrictions and limits to research collaborations outside of these groups and between these groups that could grow increasingly separated. And this could have a negative effect on the other big issue, which is the fight against climate change. So, gloomy picture and a silver lining.